Good afternoon and welcome to a special symposium of the SARE for Senate campaign. I wanted to do this today because I think it's clear that the political situation is getting alarmingly close to the danger of nuclear war. And there's certain things that have broken recently, including the alleged text sent by former British Prime Minister Liz Truss. Truss would be a terrible name for her. After minutes or a minute after the Nord Stream pipeline explosion, saying it is done in a text message to Secretary of State Blinken. And I know the Russians are demanding some answers on that and answers as to the drone attacks on the Russian base in Sevastopol, jeopardizing the transportation route for the grain shipments through the Black Sea. And one begins to wonder, is there any accountability in the world? What actions will people be forced to take? And where is the line drawn? And I think I'm not the only one wondering that. There was a very important statement released, which I think I can share with you here yesterday by the Russian Foreign Ministry, which basically demands a reiteration of the commitment to nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Let's see here, trying to scroll up to the top of this. So they say the following: as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and one of the nuclear weapons powers, in accordance with the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Russian Federation bears a special responsibility in matters related to strengthening international security and strategic stability. In implementing its policy on nuclear deterrence, Russia is strictly and consistently guided by the tenet that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Russian doctrinal approaches in this sphere are defined with utmost accuracy, pursue solely defensive goals, and do not admit of expansive interpretation. These approaches allow for Russia to hypothetically resort to nuclear weapons exclusively in response to an aggression involving the use of weapons of mass destruction or an aggression with the use of conventional weapons when the very existence of the state is in jeopardy. And I'm going to stop there because the United States doctrine is not nearly so clear. Former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter described it as nuclear blackmail, where we seem to still be giving ourselves the right to preemptive action. And this is extremely dangerous. And I thought what I would like to do today is to bring on the air Stephen Starr, who is an expert in areas that I am not. He is the former clinical laboratory science program director from the University of Missouri. He's an associate of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, former board member of Physicians for Social Responsibility. And as always, participation in my symposium does not constitute endorsement of my campaign. And I do not necessarily agree with the views expressed by all of my participants, but I think these matters urgently need to be addressed. And especially since those of us in the New York area were treated to a public service announcement about how we can survive nuclear war, I thought it would be useful to set the record straight. So Steve, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Diane. And I would like to publicly say that I endorse your candidacy. It's an honor to be able to be here, and I'm going to try to. I think I'm going to start with a short presentation that explains what a nuclear weapon does, and then what it would do to New York. It's okay if I share my screen so I can. It's all right. So, is that visible? Can you see that? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So the largest, a nuclear weapon is really like a piece of the sun. It's not. We compare it to conventional weapons made with high explosive, with terms of explosive power, but it's more than that. But to begin with, let's just look at the largest U.S. non-nuclear bomb. It's called the mother of all bombs. It has 11 tons of explosive power. A ton is 2,000 pounds, so that's 22,000 pounds of TNT. A kilo, which means 1,000, a kiloton, so that's 1/100th of a kiloton. And let's see. So let's go up to this nuclear bomb that we dropped in Hiroshima. And that had an explosive power of 15,000 tons of TNT, which is 30 million tons of TNT or 15 kilotons. So you can see here we're multiplied times 1,000 for explosive power. This is what Hiroshima looked like before the bomb was detonated. And this is what it looked like afterwards. There were about 4.5 square miles that were engulfed in a nuclear firestorm, and it just destroyed everything. Now, if we detonated a bomb like that over New York City, you can see in the center here, there's the circle, and the outer circle shows where the firestorm would go. And to give you an idea of how big that would be, if you look at this diagram, the Empire State Building is right there at the far left on the bottom. And then this would be the size relative to that of a Hiroshima bomb. But we're not talking about a Hiroshima bomb. We're talking about modern thermonuclear weapons. And if Russia decides to have a war with us, they would detonate, they have 700, 800 kiloton weapons, and that's 800,000 tons of TNT. And this would be close to what the size of that would be. There's the Empire State Building, and there would be the size of that bomb. This is a picture of a large thermonuclear bomb. It was a test in the Pacific. It's probably taken from a distance of about 50 miles. So I saw that New York was kind enough to give everybody their advice on nuclear preparedness. And these were they said, get inside, move away from windows, stay inside, check your doors, and stay tuned for instructions. So I would like you to compare that advice with what was published. This is an article that we published in 2015 in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And what would happen if an 800 kiloton nuclear warhead was detonated above Midtown Manhattan? You can look it up for more details. There were 4 images with that article. The Bulletin, unfortunately, didn't archive all of them, but I've included them all here. 1 second after the detonation of a 800 kiloton weapon, it would form a fireball about 1 mile in diameter. The surface of that fireball would be 16,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 4,000 degrees hotter than the surface of the sun. So the light from that would ignite fires up to distances 9 miles in all directions instantly. In the 30 or 40 seconds, you would see something like this. You'd see the mushroom cloud beginning and the fireball rising up. And after about 2 minutes, all those fires join together and they create winds going, vertical winds about 300 miles per hour rushing upwards. So that actually pulls wind in from the side of the area that's on fire at about that speed. That 300-mile wind is enough to uproot a tree that's 3 foot in diameter and suck people into the fire. And this is the firestorm that would be created by that. Remember the one that Hiroshima bomb had? It was just a kind of little circle in the center. So this is based on average weather. On an average weather day, you would have about 150 square miles that would be ignited into one firestorm. After about 10 to 20 minutes, all those fires would coalesce into one gigantic fire. And the air temperatures would rise well above the boiling point of water, probably 400 or 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And anyone in that zone is going to die. There's no way to hide from it. If you go underground and get into a shelter, the fire will suck all the oxygen out of it, and it'll probably heat the shelter to like a baking point. If you were 7 miles away from this, the detonation, if you were exposed to the light, it would cause 3rd-degree burns. You'd still be in the fire zone. So that's one bomb. So let's consider what the U.S. and Russia have in their nuclear inventories. The 2 tall lines at the end there, those are the U.S. and Russian weapons. We have about 11,000 of the 12,500 nuclear weapons that exist in the world. And the U.S. and Russia, if you look at the red boxes, those are the weapons that are deployed and operational and that can be ready for use within an hour. There's also stockpiled warheads that can be used. So Russia and the U.S. each have about 4,000 nuclear weapons that they can use. And there's even a couple thousand more up here that are scheduled for dismantlement. So, if you think about it, there's about 350 cities in the US with populations greater than 100,000 and about 250 in Russia. So, that's 500 warheads. And if they can, each one of them can launch 1,800 to 1,000 warheads within 2 to 15 minutes. And the presidents in the US and Russia are constantly followed by a nuclear suitcase. There's some images here. That's Putin with the suitcase. There's Obama. Trump had one, and I don't have a photo with Biden, but there's one following him around 24 hours a day. It's an automated communication device that connects them to the National Command Authority, and they can issue a launch order for 1 warhead or 1,000 warheads. And it takes about less than a minute to issue the order. Then it takes probably 2 minutes for that command to be carried out. All the people that are at the launch centers are on constant 24-hour alert, waiting for the order to come in. So let's just say if there's an attack that's detected electronically by early warning systems, the president would have 1 to 12 minutes to decide whether to retaliate with a nuclear strike based on that early warning data. That's because it takes 30 minutes for an ICBM from Russia to hit the US and vice versa. If it's from a submarine off the coast, it can take 9 minutes to hit its target. So it usually takes about 7 minutes to evaluate early warning systems and call the president. He would be given a 30-second briefing by his top military advisors, and he would have 1 to 3 minutes to decide what to do before the time would run out. And if there's a false warning of attack, it could start a nuclear war. So let's say there is a full-scale nuclear detonation. Now, let's see, that didn't work. Let me get to, I'm going to go to, let's see. It's supposed to show the images of what would happen to a. So this is a diagram that was created by the scientists to show what would happen. Each click is a day, and the smoke is rising from the target areas after a large nuclear war. And it only takes about 7 to 10 days for the smoke to circle the Earth in the stratosphere. When it's in the stratosphere, it's above cloud level, and it can't be rained out. And after 3 or 4 weeks, there would just be a global stratospheric smoke layer that would block sunlight from reaching. 70% of the sunlight would be blocked from reaching the surface of the northern hemisphere and 35% in the south. That would produce daily temperatures below freezing for up to 3 years in central North America and central Eurasia. And the smoke, because it's above cloud level, it can't be rained out. So it would be up there for a decade, and it would basically prevent crops from being grown for many years, probably 10 years. So most humans and land animals would starve to death. So let's see, I'll go back to my, so this is what the sky would look like after a war like that. This would be at noon. The sun would look like a full moon at midnight. That's how dark it would be here. I just thought I'd throw in a few pictures in Russia, this is their big command center where they're always waiting for the order to fire. This is NORAD in the US. These guys are there 24 hours a day. They're waiting for the orders from the president. And that's enough horrible information. But, I've always tried to tell people that I don't think there are any political or national goals that are worth risking the destruction of the human race. And no matter what, we wipe out. And there's so many things that are beautiful in life, all the living things on the planet, all these other species that we share the planet with don't really care about our squabbles, and they certainly don't deserve to be wiped out in some horrible nuclear war. Anyway, that's enough. You want me to stop sharing my screen, or you want to have questions? I think I'd rather have a discussion about this than keep talking.
Sure. Well, you can stop sharing and we can bring Jose in. And then if you need to show images again to answer questions, you can do
Yes.
that. That'll be fine. Dave or Jose, maybe we can all three be in the screen together here. Well, I certainly have some questions, and someone's asking me about hypersonic missiles. I have a question about these planes that we're about to be shipping over to Europe ahead of schedule. I forget, the F-60 or something or other, capable of dropping gravity bombs.
Okay.
I was actually wondering while Jose is thinking, I know he has a lot of questions. Can you explain what is special about a gravity bomb? It seems to me that all
Sure.
bombs are based on gravity. So what is
Well,
that?
the U.S. has about 100 gravity bombs, nuclear weapons that are forward based in Europe at 5 NATO bases. And these bombs, they call them tactical, but they're variable yield, which means that you can set the explosive power on the bomb. The ones they want to ship over there now, the B-61-12 bombs, you can have the lowest explosive power on those, the equivalent to 300 tons of TNT or 0.3 kilotons. So if you look at that, that's 27 times larger than our largest conventional weapon, but it blurs the distinction between, conventional high explosive weapons and nuclear weapons. It makes them more usable, you might say. You can put an upper yield on that with 50 kilotons, which is, the Hiroshima bomb was 15 kilotons. So, it'd be quite a few times larger than a Hiroshima bomb. But these weapons they're guided. They can be satellite guided weapons. They can hit targets pretty precisely. We've been able to launch weapons from a submarine any place we want. When you put weapons on a military base, forward base, it's also a political statement. It's not, you don't have to have those to have a nuclear war to hit Russian targets with nuclear weapons. But these are more threatening in my mind because they're low yield weapons. They call them low. It's not low, but the military commanders are more likely to use those in the event that they're losing and they don't, what else are they going to do if their armies are getting wiped out? That
Right,
starts an escalation. Russia's got tactical nuclear weapons too. If they respond, then we respond, and it goes up. And every war game that NATO had over the years, once the nuclear firebreak was crossed, once nuclear weapons were detonated, it always escalated into a full-scale nuclear war.
sure. Well, Jose, go ahead. I have some more questions, but Jose, go ahead.
Yeah, I hope I come across okay, but I think the scariest. I mean, my whole skin is crawling based off that presentation alone.
Yeah.
I think the worst part of it too was the time that the president has to actually react to a nuclear bomb, because it says it takes about 7 minutes just to get to the president, and then he gets a 30-second briefing. Right? So it's like he doesn't even get all the context.
Right.
I don't think anybody could ever give a professional, solid, full context briefing in 30 seconds. All right, Mr. President, 30-second rundown. What do you want to do? How are we responding? It's like, and
Right.
I think about the people we have in charge right now who are responsible for figuring out if we should respond with a nuclear bomb, but also the fact that it could be a false warning. Now, take into account these talks of dirty bombs in Ukraine. First of all, what exactly is a dirty bomb, if you can explain that to me?
Sure.
And why is that dangerous?
Well, a nuclear weapon, a dirty bomb is not a nuclear weapon. A dirty bomb does not explode with a nuclear force. It is a conventional high explosive weapon that is surrounded by radioactive material, and the explosion from that bomb disperses the radioactive material. Radioactive materials can be incredibly dangerous at the atomic and molecular level. If you have 1.2 grams of cesium-137 and you vaporize it and distribute it over a square mile, you can't live there for a century or longer. It's that toxic. But a dirty bomb, might politically be viewed as a nuclear weapon that NATO could justify intervening with. I mean, that's the story that I've read, but it's not a nuclear weapon. Did you had another question too?
Well, I guess it's just what is the likelihood of responding with a nuclear weapon to a dirty bomb? Because I guess now we're kind of getting into political armchair.
Then it depends. You talk about a false warning of attack. In times of peace, when there's not a lot of tension, there may not be an assumption that Russia is launching a sneak attack on us, or vice versa. But when you get to where there's even no longer diplomatic contact, and Biden's calling Putin a murderer and a war criminal, and he must be removed from power. And, the Russians know that the U.S. can launch missiles from their subs on a low trajectory that will hit Moscow in a matter of maybe 7 to 9 minutes. So their system is set up where they have a button that can override at their National Command Authority headquarters. They can override all lower levels of command and automatically launch all of their nuclear missiles that way. And they also have what they call a dead hand, or a perimeter is their name for it, system where if the National Command Authority loses contact with the president, and they have a whole variety of things, they have seismic sensors, optical sensors, cable, all the different lines of communication. If they're all severed at a time when they're expecting an attack, then they will launch they can launch a communication rocket that will broadcast a launch orders to all surviving Russian nuclear weapons. So it's sort of a semi-automated system to start a nuclear war. Theoretically, that gives the Russians the luxury of not launching on warning, if they ride out the attack, but if they're killed, then they will launch a retaliatory strike. Can I say one thing about that? The Russians view our ballistic missile defense systems, they call it defense, but Putin had a Putin's warning, look it up, 2016 in St. Petersburg. He told the journalists there that, so we view this as part of an offensive system, because if you launch a first strike against us, destroy most of our land-based missiles where they have most of their warheads, you can use that defense system as a mop-up system for our surviving nuclear forces. So we have those Aegis ashore bases in Romania and Poland that are on the Russian border, and they use a Mark 41 launch system that is dual use, and it can launch Tomahawk cruise missiles as well as interceptor missiles. The missiles go into the launchers in boxes. No one can observe whether they're putting a Tomahawk or an interceptor missile in them. The Tomahawks can carry a nuclear warhead. So they view this as, U.S. missile launching sites on their border. And cruise missiles are hard to shoot down. I mean, they hug the land, they go all over the place. So even though they have advanced air defense systems, it's not a given they could shoot them all down if they would launch there. So that's part of the reason they demanded last December in their draft treaties that, we remove those 2 missile sites from Poland and Romania, and I'm kind of waiting to see how that works out.
You're muted, Diane.
Whoops, sorry about that. This whole idea of the threat of nuclear annihilation being a deterrent, right? And then people say, but of course, it's only a deterrent if you're willing to have your bluff called, which seems even more insane, frankly. I mean, could you say something about this peculiar logic?
Well, every country that has nuclear weapons has them because they're deterring another country with their possession. Jonathan Schell, who I admired, talked about the bomb in the mind. The first bomb that was created, we were creating that because it was going to be a deterrent. Well, although we didn't use it that way, but that's how all the nations justify their nuclear arsenals, based on nuclear deterrence. But it's a theory, and a single failure of nuclear deterrence that could start a nuclear war. So, everybody points to the nuclear weapons saying, well, it's prevented war since World War II. It's prevented a global war. Well, yeah, but maybe we're lucky. If you look at the Cuban Missile Crisis or some of the other things, there's been quite a few false warnings of attack. I published an article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists about this. They started classifying all those false warnings after 1985, but there was a point there where there's a bad chip in a NORAD computer, and it inserted a war game into the big screen. I showed you that picture of NORAD, and they rolled back the lids on the silos and were launching the planes. And we just about had a nuclear war then, but they said, "Oh, sorry, it's just a test tape." But that's a kind of a black swan event that, how do we know? But now, if you ratchet up tensions like we have right now, maybe they wouldn't, maybe they'd launch anyway. I don't know. It's not a good thing.
No, it seems very dangerous. Could you say something about the mother of all bombs that we dropped on Afghanistan? What was that? What was that about?
Yeah, I tried to show a picture of that. My slides probably went too fast, but that has about 11 tons of high explosive power in it. The Russians maybe have one that's a little bit bigger. I think it's like a fuel air explosive, where it releases a huge amount of fuel over a large area, and then it detonates that. It creates a massive explosion. But it has 11 tons of TNT equivalent. I don't think they made a whole lot of them, maybe 100 or something, but it's enormous. You have to have a pretty big plane to drop that. But when you have a B-61-12 gravity bomb that you can carry under a F-35 or whatever you want to use it on, and any nuclear capable aircraft, that then you can go from 300 tons of TNT up to 50,000 tons. So that's what the military commanders are attracted to these, because if their army's getting wiped out by a Russian tank army that's coming across the border, they might say, well, the only way we can stop these, but we're just going to use the smallest yield on this nuclear bomb and we'll stop them. And they'll know better than to retaliate against us. And that's.
Wow. And then all
Can
bets
I?
are off. Go ahead, Jose.
Right? Yeah, yeah. So, I know the president is the guy who makes the final call, but you hear stories of Kennedy, right, who had all these generals around him saying, no, we can win a nuclear war. We just have to do tactical nukes here, here, and here. And you also look at the movie that Kennedy helped produce, it's called 7 Days in May, right? How realistic is a scenario like that where a general or a rogue general or somebody in the White House who says, you know what, the president doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't have the guts to do war. I want to do this. How realistic is a scenario like that?
Well, it's possible. I don't think they would have made the movie, and Kennedy wouldn't have done it if he didn't think it was possible. And I would say one of the reasons why it's possible is because they have a chain of command. Not just the president can release a nuclear weapon. In the event that the president's unavailable, there's a list of people in the Joint Chiefs that's it's classified. They don't tell us who that would be, but they are allowed to launch nuclear weapons. They can give the launch order. Let's see, I think I've got a lot of sun here. That look a little bit better. Sorry about that. So if you can go down the chain of command and somebody issues a launch order, then what happens if the president shows up and wants to countermand that order? I mean, things can get really confusing. I'm sure the Russians probably have the same sort of thing. Well, they have the dead hand system, but yeah, the whole nuclear system is set up so they can be used instantly if it needs to. But then they set up all these things to prevent it from being used to make it safe. And I've argued with people at the UN in the past about, I said, well, how can you tell me that this is safe from a rogue military commander when it can be used with such ease by somebody opening a nuclear suitcase and giving an order? It just if, for example, all the nuclear command and information, the control stuff is kept separate from the internet, right? But suppose somebody gets a data stick and gets into that system and puts a virus in there that can lay dormant until it's triggered by something. There's so many possibilities for things to get screwed up. They will pat us on the head and reassure us that nuclear deterrence is safe, but it's a lie. I mean, it's just a theory, and it's time for us to wake up, and especially with the people that are running the country right now, and understand that we are just a hair's breadth away from a nuclear war that will wipe us out. We need there's a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. It's been signed and ratified by a lot of non-nuclear weapon states. Been boycotted by the states that have nuclear weapons because well, we don't need this. That's it works against the non-proliferation treaty, but that's BS. Sorry. We really do need to get rid of nuclear weapons. Yes, we can still remember how to make them, but we can set up safeguards so that very few could be produced before somebody would detect it. And a war fought with a handful of nuclear weapons wouldn't wipe out the human race. So I think we'd be much better off in a situation like that than we are right now.
I think Douglas MacArthur was really right when he said, now that we have this capability, we shouldn't have war anymore.
Right.
Because once you have, like what was set up with Russia, where I forget if it was Boris Johnson or whoever on the UK side said Russia cannot win. Well, if that's your position, and you clearly have no understanding of what happened to Napoleon or Hitler when he invaded the Soviet Union, and you have no idea of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, and your position is Russia cannot win. And you know that the position of Russia is Russia cannot lose, because they're not going to surrender to a Nazi-infested regime on their border. Then you're just begging the question of when does this line get crossed? And I can imagine from the standpoint of Russia, if you see that these people are so wacky that they're willing to blow up their own energy source, the Nord Stream pipeline, they're willing to potentially cut off food to millions of starving people, then you have to ask, well, where would they stop? I think that's why Russia would have put out this document. Where do you consider a line, a threshold, where you say no more, we cannot possibly go over that line, it's the annihilation of the human race, or do they care? I mean, that's the thing that I think must be so alarming.
Well, that's why we desperately need somebody like you in the Senate, somebody that will say these things, because right now there's a deadly silence, that we have the war party and Republicans and Democrats are just very happy to go along with all this war talk.
Well, I think that's where Jose comes in, because as you may know, Steve, it was Jose and Kynan, two of my top petition gatherers, who called out AOC and have intervened on a number of other leaders. And of course, what you discover, even though there were only 12 people or however many there in the meeting with AOC, the video went all over the place, because clearly this is on the mind of sane people.
There's been so much censorship in the US for so long, and people have been blocked, and topics like this just don't make it to the mainstream media. The scientists that did these studies on the effects, the long-term environmental consequences of nuclear war, they weren't even allowed an audience with the national security advisor to Obama for a number of years. I mean, I think that these consequences need to be publicly discussed, acknowledged and discussed by the leaders of the nuclear weapon states. That's a starting point for nuclear weapon disarmament and everything else. But I mean, right now, Biden needs to, he doesn't need to be giving any more Armageddon speeches and telling us how, a country's endangered by half the population who voted Republican. I mean, this is not the thing that we need to hear. We need to use the $65 trillion that we spent, could have built high schools for over 1 million American kids. Stop spending money on war and endangering our survival, and take care of the United States.
Yeah, if I may just come in, I mean, this is exactly why Kynan and I had intervened on AOC, because, regardless of why these people ran, or regardless of how we got into the situation, or whatever you think we are, how we got into the situation, whether Russia and Putin is the bad guy, whether Ukraine is this or that, whether it was NATO, it doesn't matter at this point. We're only a few missteps away from nuclear war, right? And that's what matters, right? You have to just tell everybody needs to calm down. And that's why I went over there and demanded of AOC, hey, realize what you're getting us into. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie Threads.
Yes.
It's a BBC produced film that was only aired once. As far as the history goes, it was only aired once because so many people called in, said it was too scary and too realistic of a depiction of what would happen in a nuclear Armageddon. It's on YouTube. Yeah, and it scared the bejesus out of my head. You talk about horror films, but that's just realistically what would happen.
Well, they had The Day After, back in the 80s, that was widely watched in the United States. And that was kind of before all the strategic arms reduction agreements came about. I might have misspoke a second ago. I think I should have said $65 billion has been spent on the war.
Trillion. That's all right. It'll be trillion soon.
Yeah. Well, but our defense budget's pushing $1 trillion. I mean, what are we doing? I don't know.
Right. Well, this also gives me a fresh appreciation for what Lyndon LaRouche was trying to do with the Strategic Defense Initiative. Because if you say, well, we really can't quite trust, is there any way that we can supersede this with a new technology which is shared between the nuclear powers? You don't want it one-sided. You want everybody to have the ability to stop these missiles, to prevent them from detonating on their targets. And of course, the technology didn't exist yet, but he saw that as sort of a science driver opportunity, like the manned space program, and that if the US and the Soviet Union could work together on creating some kind of actual defense, a technology that superseded what we had in way of the missiles, that perhaps you could come up with a way of getting rid of these things. I mean, actually take this off the table. And I also know, Russia now has done, I think one of the reasons they pushed so hard to develop these hypersonic missiles and other things is because they also cannot trust. So they had to come up with some way of a different kind of deterrence, I'll put it that way. But do you have thoughts on this?
Well, I think when Putin announced that when the U.S. abrogated the ABM treaty, the anti-ballistic missile treaty, he was in Munich 2007, I think, 2009. He said, well, you know, we're going to have to respond to this, and we're not going to build a missile defense system, but we're going to build weapons that will offset your ABM system. And that's what they've done. The hypersonic weapons, our ABM systems cannot shoot down the hypersonic maneuverable vehicles. They can hardly even detect them. So, you know, as far as defending against that, I don't know. Russia has said that their new S-500 system can shoot down incoming ballistic missile warheads from a range of like 6 miles in the exo-atmosphere. But, you know, I don't know. You know, that Reagan and Gorbachev almost eliminated nuclear weapons in Regachev in Finland, but they were stopped because Reagan insisted that the U.S. be allowed to continue with the Star Wars initiative, which was a defense system against nuclear missiles. It never really worked, you know, even though the system we have right now, it's just, you know, when you try to hit a warhead with a warhead, you know, they're each going 17,000 miles per hour. It really doesn't work very well. It's been suggested that the U.S. could replace their kinetic warheads with nuclear warheads and make it more effective. That's one of the concerns the Russians have. But I don't know, you know, we're a ways, I think, from developing the system that you suggest. So my thought is that we need to just acknowledge the existential danger of nuclear war to begin with, and at least lower the tensions. Once we actually get back to where there's not so much tension, we could start lowering the number of weapons quickly. Somebody once said, asked an expert that I knew of, how do you get rid of nuclear weapons really fast? Oh, nuclear warhead. He goes, well, put it in molasses. I mean, you can actually disable, you can do this quickly if you wanted to. We don't have to leave the self-destruct system for humanity on 24-hour alert. But it's going to be there as long as we have the kind of dialogue or non-dialogue that's going on right now.
Right. Well, I don't think this can last terribly long. I mean, it's a real point of tension. As in a musical composition, really, you can sit on the tension for so long and then it's going to resolve one way or the other. And that's what's so disconcerting here. What I find is the lack of conscience on the West, that people can inflict such unbelievable cruelty, because then you say, well, what is going to stop them from launching this? On the other hand, I've been reading Scott Ritter's book, and disarmament in the time of perestroika. And you see what these people did on the ground, the inspectors who decided on both sides that they were going to actually make this thing work. That's very hopeful. He keeps saying that people should learn from the things we did in the past, which succeeded. That is, don't forget the bad things we did in history. Don't forget the good things we did in history. And that at the point whatever resolution happens here, we're going to have to talk about nuclear weapons reduction. I'm just afraid that you have people who have no intention of allowing this to resolve. And that's why what Jose is doing, why I'm running my campaign, I think we need a total tsunami of public interventions on public officials to get some sense into them. And I will also say that I think it's the case that between the pandemic, the January 6th has been used as a pretext to shut down Washington so you don't have access to your elected officials. These congressmen are kept in a little bubble, and most of them are wealthy. They don't know what's on people's minds. I think many of them actually, I hate to say it, that they could be so dumb, but are unaware that this danger is on the mind of so many Americans. And therefore, we have to also really make it known. I mean, some of them have their insider trading and they're making money off of Raytheon or whatever, but a lot of them, I think, could be moved to act and put the brakes on.
Well, another problem is that the neocons have published articles. They started in 2006 in Foreign Affairs by Lieber and Press. It was about how the U.S. had nuclear primacy over Russia, and we could destroy all Russian nuclear weapons with a first strike and have no retaliation. And I worry the people in charge, like Newland and Blinken, maybe they still think that. You know, maybe that was as far as they got. They go, well, this is good, you know. So that's a real bubble. I mean, that's
right. No, I've met people who have told me that. I met a military fellow a few years ago who said to me, "Oh no, the U.S. could wipe out all of their ability to return a second strike." That's a gamble I'd really like to take. That's a gamble I think we should all take.
Well, the scientists are working on the effects of what a successful nuclear strike would do, and it looks like that it would still kill everybody in the northern hemisphere, at least from starvation, because it's still going to create so much smoke up in the stratosphere that we're not going to be able to grow any food for years. So you can't win. It's a nuclear war cannot be won and must not be fought.
Exactly. Well, I think Eisenhower said the only thing worse than losing a nuclear war would be winning a nuclear war.
That's right. Right.
So that's very true. Well, I think we should wrap up here. I really appreciate your doing this, Steve. We have to keep it real for people. I think that public service announcement, and someone from my campaign actually called the New York City Department of Emergency Management to ask, is this a joke?
Yeah.
And they were
the article from the bulletin. Say, how does this correspond with your stay inside and with stay tuned instructions?
right, exactly. And they said they were very offended. They said, no, this is very serious.
Well, if you shoot an atomic bomb off 50 miles away from New York, that might be good advice. But they have a fudge factor. They don't tell you where the bomb is or how big how big the explosion was. So they can say, oh, this is good advice. Yeah, it's not in the real world, though. Not with Russia throwing 700, 800 kiloton weapons at us. So.
Right. Right. Yeah. And
good luck, and thank you for having me. I'll be glad to help you anytime, any way I can. So.
Great. Well, I appreciate it very, very much. And Jose, thank you. Thank you for your work. And I can assure everybody who's listening that we are absolutely going to keep it up until we get this Congress to shape up and come to their senses and put the brakes on, because a nuclear war cannot be allowed to happen. So thank you both.